Hey, 5.5 video here. Planning to write a guided literary analysis on drama. Let's do this. Your essential question that I'd like you to write down in your Cornell notes is, how do I plan a guided literary analysis on an extract from Oedipus Rex? Because that is the summative assessment for this unit. How do I start is our first question. Well, we're going to color mark because formalism is finding meaning through patterns and structures, and you will be using a formalist lens for the guided literary analysis. So a really good technique to look for patterns of language that are interesting and meaningful and shape meaning in a text is to color mark, as we've been doing since we started the semester with our poetry unit. So we're going to look for patterns of interesting language by color marking the text. You're going to be focusing on the words. That's what diction is. That each individual word and what kinds of words are used, how they are similar to each other is the first thing to look for. And the more precise you can get, the better in labeling these terms. You're going to look at imagery, and I like to think of imagery in two separate ways. First, as comparative imagery, so any imagery that takes on a figurative significance, that has some kind of comparison involved, where one thing is being compared to another, maybe without the words like or as, but are still compared. Another kind of imagery is sensory details, the evocation of one or more of the five senses. So that would be visual imagery, auditory imagery, taste imagery, sound, I already did sound, touch imagery, and smell imagery. They have fancier terms too, if you want to look those up, but we'll stick with those. Tone and structure too are other awesome things to look for, So look for anything that comes up more than once, and trace it. Some of the things that you notice will take you to a good conclusion, something that you could write about, and some won't. So you just have to try. You will figure this out through trial. All right, how about, here are some things that are listed in the packet. This technique comes from the genius IB instructor, Caroline O'Neill. I got to give her credit. And these were some of the things she suggested to look for. She said, look for words of space, or words of color, or words of texture, time words, alternative word meanings, unusual words, or regular words used in irregular ways. Things like weather, seasons, oppositional pairs. And these are listed already in your packet, so you don't need to write them down again. How do I label the patterns is the next question, because these are what will become your paragraphs in your guided literary analysis. And so the way you label them are really important. And one tip that I want to give you today is to be as specific and as precise when you're analyzing each example. But when you're labeling a larger pattern, you might want to be a little bit more general. Using the word references is a great way to collect different examples that seem to fit, but aren't exactly the same kind of literary feature. For example, Aaron and I were talking about this yesterday. He talked about references to disappearing. And what we found were that there were some examples of certain words, word choices, diction, like breathe on the void and our void, do not exist, drifts away, that have to do with disappearing, not existing anymore. And then we also noticed that there were some sensory details that connected to this idea of disappearing, like sunlight shifting in images. That is a good evocation of at least our visual sense, and maybe beyond, maybe tactile touch as well. And then by the end of this particular passage, your great days like ghosts gone. And there we have some comparative imagery, like ghosts gone, the comparison between his great days and ghosts that are disappearing. Okay, so we could call that large label references to disappearing, and then when we talk about each example, we'll get more specific in how we label it. How do I write a good non-debatable literal statement is the next question I want you to write down. And this one, I think, is this one, two, this is our third item on our Cornell notes. And just a reminder that non-debatable literal statements are ones that no one could disagree with because they are true. That's the definition. Is it interesting? In other words, it's not too obvious. You don't want a literal statement that says the strophic pair references Greek names. Probably not very interesting since the play is in ancient Greece and all of the names are going to be Greek, right? But maybe you could find something interesting about the Greek names and look at, who is being referenced. Are they all mortals or are they gods? And is there a change? Maybe that would inform some meaning. How about, is it focused on a pattern that includes both the strophe and the antistrophe? Now, if you notice that there's a pattern that seems to appear more strongly in one section and another, you could talk about it if it makes sense in terms of how it shapes meaning. But just keep in mind that our intentions here are to interpret the entire chunk, both the strophe and the antistrophe. So if a pattern occurs over both, it's going to be an easier way, I think, to help you make sense of the passage as a whole. Is it about the language of the text? You want your literal statement to be about interesting language in the strophic pair. And then finally, is it concise, clear, and true? All right, moving on to how do I write a good interpretive or debatable statement? First of all, an interpretive or debatable statement is a statement in which you investigate a meaning beyond the literal when we're talking about guided literary analysis. Does it get to a larger theme or idea? Something like fate versus free will? Or what are some of the other larger themes that we've talked about in the play? Can you support it with several examples, at least two from the text? Does it explore rather than prescribe meaning? And this is why I'm always harping on the words suggest versus represents. If you say represents, then you are prescribing meaning. You're saying that this is what Sophocles meant. And the truth is, we'll never know that. We'll never know what he meant. And so what we are doing is we are exploring possibilities by saying that these choices suggest a meaning rather than saying these choices show or represent a particular meaning, because that assumes that we understand the author's intention, and we just simply don't. Is it debatable and profound? Does it really make you think, like, ooh, that's interesting? And could somebody fight you on it? It's the opposite in that way of the non-debatable literal play. Okay, a good example of a literal statement about a pattern for a strophic pair. This comes from Parados, Strophic Pair 1, which was in the mid-unit summative assessment, and I stole this from one of your responses. So just a reminder, here is the passage. And the pattern is a questioning tone turning to a pleading tone and some references to, oh wait, I'm sorry, that should just be a questioning tone turning to a pleading tone, period, sorry. Here's the literal statement. The strophe's questioning tone is created by two questions in the first three lines. The pleading tone develops in the antistrophe as the chorus prays and then pleads to the gods with imperative sentences and exclamation marks. Right. It is a good literal statement. It's clear, concise, and true, focusing on language from the strophic pair. How about a good example of an interpretive statement about a pattern? Well, let's use that same one. Here's our literal statement. And now for an interpretive statement where we try to explore the ways this pattern shapes meaning, we'll say the strophe uses a questioning tone, which suggests the confusion and lack of knowledge in the chorus. The pleading tone in the antistrophe suggests the public's faith in the gods is being strengthened as they continue to pray to be saved again. This contrast in tone in the pair shows the gradual gain of blind faith in the gods, regardless of their misfortunes or the fact that they can't see them. So then this needs to be supported with text. I'm just showing you the literal statement and the interpretive statement. But I think this is a valid interpretation that certainly can be supported and is interesting. It gets to theme and meaning, this idea of blind faith and believing in the gods. It's profound in and of itself that a questioning leads to a faith in human nature. All right, what will our test be on? Here's your last question. It's going to be on two strophic pairs, and you'll write on one of the two. You won't know which one you will be assigned until you arrive, so you have to prepare for both. And the first passage is going to be strophic pair 2 from Ode 2. This is found on pages 14 through 15 of our play. It begins with haughtiness in the high hand of disdain and ends with and reverence for the gods has died away. This is the strophic pair that you probably used for 5.3, and it will be one of the passages for the summative assessment. The second extract is going to be the strophic pair 2 from Ode 4, found on page 19, that begins with, and now of all men ever known, and ends with, to Thebes, while the false years went by. This is the strophic pair that many of you have used for 5.4. Okay, so you can get started analyzing those. You've already done some analyzing. I'm going to include some guiding questions, and I will get those to you as soon as possible. And your job is to do a guided literary analysis. So you have to do more than just find one pattern of language and make a literal and interpretive statement. I think it's a good rule of thumb to find 3 patterns of language, make literal and interpretive statements, and then look at how the 3 connect and coalesce to create a singular meaning. All right, so that is going to be the next step, is to kind of form an outline based on the color marking that you do. All right, good luck to you guys as you tackle these 2 passages in more detail.